Most people think the scariest part is hearing a knock at your door late at night. It isn't. The scariest part is looking through the peephole and realizing the person outside is still standing there. Tonight's stories are about real people who opened the door and regretted it. I had only been living in the house for about 3 weeks when the knocking started. The place sat in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't one of those wealthy neighborhoods with gates and security patrols, but it was calm enough that people left bicycles on their porches overnight without worrying about them disappearing. That was the whole reason I moved there. After a rough breakup and a year of sharing loud apartments with random roommates, I wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere boring. The house itself was small, 1 floor, unfinished basement, narrow backyard with a wooden fence that leaned slightly to the left. The previous owner had clearly been old. Floral wallpaper still covered parts of the hallway, and the kitchen smelled faintly like cigarette smoke no matter how much I cleaned. But the rent was cheap. I worked remote IT support for a hospital network, mostly overnight shifts, so I usually stayed awake until 3 or 4 in the morning anyway. My life had become repetitive in the most depressing way possible. Coffee, computer screen, calls from angry nurses, microwave dinners, sleep during the day. Most nights the neighborhood felt dead after midnight. No traffic, no barking dogs, nothing. That silence became the reason I noticed the knocking immediately. The first time it happened, I checked my computer clock automatically. 2:13 a.m. 3 slow knocks hit the front door. Knock, knock, knock. Not aggressive, not someone pounding in panic, just measured. I muted my headset and stared toward the living room. At first, I genuinely thought maybe a neighbor needed help. Maybe someone locked themselves out or had a car issue. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Nobody. The porch light illuminated the empty front steps and part of the driveway beyond them. Rain from earlier still glistened on the concrete. I stood there another few seconds before opening the door slightly. Cold air rushed inside. Nothing. No footsteps. No movement. No cars. The street was completely empty. I locked the door again, feeling mildly stupid for getting nervous over nothing. About 20 minutes later, the same 3 knocks came again, this time louder. I opened the door immediately. Still nobody there. That's when the whole thing started bothering me. Not because I believed anything supernatural was happening. I don't believe in ghosts or any of that stuff. But I knew what knocking sounded like. It hadn't been pipes, or the house settling, or tree branches. Someone knocked. The next day, I bought a cheap Ring doorbell camera, mostly because curiosity was eating at me. The second night after installing it, nothing happened. Same with the third. I actually started feeling embarrassed about the whole thing, like maybe stress and exhaustion had gotten to me. Then on the 4th night, the knocking came back. 2:13 a.m. exactly. 3 knocks. I nearly jumped out of my chair. This time, my phone buzzed immediately with a motion notification. I opened the Ring app. The live feed showed my porch under the pale glow of the porch light. At first, the porch looked empty. Then movement appeared near the far left edge of the frame. Someone was standing just outside the camera's full view. I could only see part of their shoulder and one arm hanging at their side. Dark hoodie, tall build. The figure slowly leaned closer toward the door. Knock, knock, knock. The sound echoed directly through the camera microphone. Then the person stepped backward out of frame again. I rushed to the peephole immediately. Nobody there. Not even footsteps retreating. I opened the front door again and looked around outside. Empty street. My stomach started tightening in a way I couldn't really explain. The next morning, I showed the clip to my friend Marcus while we were gaming online. He laughed at first. "Bro, you're getting haunted by DoorDash?" But after replaying it twice, even he admitted it felt weird. Mostly because whoever it was never fully showed their face, almost like they were intentionally avoiding the camera. That night, I decided to stay near the front window around 2 a.m. I turned off every light in the house except my office monitor and waited in silence. By 2:12, I felt ridiculous. Then a figure walked slowly up my driveway. I froze immediately. The person moved casually, hands in hoodie pockets, head lowered slightly. Not drunk, not stumbling. Deliberate. They climbed the porch steps and stopped directly outside the front door. 3 knocks. I watched from behind the curtain, barely breathing. The figure didn't leave afterward. They just stood there, completely motionless. 30 seconds passed, then a full minute. My phone buzzed again with another ring notification, even though I was already watching them in real life. I looked down at the app. The camera's night vision made the figure look pale gray, faceless. Then slowly, the person leaned closer toward the doorbell camera, close enough that the microphone crackled slightly, and in a calm voice, they whispered, "Open the door." I physically felt my stomach drop. There was something wrong with the tone, not threatening, not angry. Just calm, like they genuinely expected me to obey. I backed away from the window immediately. A few seconds later, the figure stepped off the porch and disappeared into the darkness near the sidewalk. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next day, I called the non-emergency police line. An officer came by that afternoon and reviewed the footage on my phone. He looked bored at first. Probably assumed it was neighborhood kids. But after hearing the whisper, his expression changed slightly. "You live here alone?" he asked. "Yeah." "You tell many people that?" That question bothered me more than the knocking itself. Because honestly, not many people knew where I lived yet. I'd only moved recently. The officer suggested brighter floodlights, and left after taking a report. That evening I installed another camera facing the driveway. Nothing happened for 4 nights. Then on the 5th night, I woke suddenly without knowing why. Pitch black room. The digital clock beside my bed read 2:13 a.m. Right then, 3 knocks echoed through the house again. Except this time they didn't come from the front door. They came from the back door. Every muscle in my body locked up. The backyard was fenced in completely. There was no easy way in unless someone climbed over. I grabbed my phone and quietly walked into the kitchen. The back door had a small glass window above the handle. At first I couldn't see anything outside except darkness and the faint outline of my fence. Then something slowly rose into view. A face. Someone had been crouching beneath the window. Only their eyes were visible at first, wide, unblinking. I stumbled backward so fast I nearly fell over one of the kitchen chairs. The face disappeared immediately. Then came 3 more knocks, harder this time. Knock, knock, knock. I called 911 right away. While whispering to the dispatcher, I heard footsteps crunching slowly through leaves outside the house. Not running. Walking. Circling. The dispatcher told me officers were already on the way and asked if I could stay somewhere secure. I locked myself in the upstairs bathroom with a kitchen knife because apparently panic makes you stupid. From inside the bathroom, I could still hear movement downstairs. Then the knocking started again. Not on doors anymore. On walls. 3 knocks at a time. Different spots around the house. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. Then another set somewhere else, like whoever it was wanted me to know they were still there. The police arrived about 7 minutes later. The moment red and blue lights flashed through the bathroom window, the noises stopped. Officers searched the property with flashlights. Nothing. No forced entry. No damage. One officer found muddy scrape marks on the back fence where someone had climbed over recently, but no footprints leading away from the property. That shook me badly enough that I stayed in a hotel the next 2 nights. I almost convinced myself not to return at all. But eventually, I did. And for about 2 weeks, everything stayed quiet. Long enough for me to start relaxing again. Then, one Friday night, I got home from grabbing takeout around midnight and noticed something strange immediately. My porch light was off. I always left it on. I checked my phone. The bulb hadn't burned out. The power switch inside had been flipped off manually. That meant someone had been on my porch. I went inside quickly and locked the door. Around 1:45 a.m., I checked every camera feed. Nothing unusual. The driveway empty. Backyard empty. Street empty. At exactly 2:13, all 3 cameras disconnected simultaneously. No signal. The house became completely silent. Then came the knocking. Not from outside, from the basement door. I stared toward the hallway leading downstairs, feeling every hair on my arm stand up. I hadn't been in the basement much since moving there. It mostly held old boxes left behind by the previous owner. The knocking came again. 3 slow knocks from beneath the basement door. Knock. 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 I honestly don't think I've ever felt fear like that before. Because suddenly, I realized something. If someone was downstairs, then they were already inside the house. I backed toward the front door carefully without taking my eyes off the basement hallway. Another knock came. Then silence. I unlocked the front door and practically ran outside barefoot into the cold. The second I reached the driveway, every light inside the house turned off. All at once. I called 911 again while backing toward my car. As I stood there waiting for police, I looked toward the front window. Someone was standing inside my living room. Tall, dark hoodie, completely still, watching me. I screamed at the dispatcher that someone was in my house. The figure slowly raised one hand toward the glass, then pointed downward, toward the basement. Police arrived less than 5 minutes later. This time, they searched the entire property thoroughly. And in the basement, they found something that genuinely made one of the officers curse under his breath. A folding chair, positioned directly beneath the basement stairs, facing upward toward the door. Beside it were several empty water bottles, fast food wrappers, and a small flashlight. Someone had been living down there, possibly for days, maybe weeks. The officer asked if I ever noticed food missing. At first I said no. Then I remembered random things disappearing occasionally. Bread, frozen meals, bottled water. I'd blamed myself every time. Police searched for fingerprints, but apparently never identified anyone. I moved out 3 days later. I never went back to the house after that. The creepiest part happened months later. I was living in an apartment downtown by then when I got an email notification from Ring saying my subscription was about to expire for the old address. Out of curiosity, I logged back into the account. The new tenants had already moved in, a young couple. Their car sat in the driveway beneath the porch light. Everything looked normal. Then motion activated the front camera. A tall figure in a dark hoodie walked slowly toward the porch, stopped at the front door, and at exactly 2:13 a.m. raised their hand and knocked 3 times. I was 24 when I moved into the apartment complex outside Phoenix, Arizona. The place wasn't horrible, but it definitely wasn't somewhere you walked around comfortably at night. Half the hallway lights flickered constantly, the elevators smelled like cigarettes, and police showed up often enough that nobody even looked out their windows anymore. Still, it was cheap. And at the time, cheap was all I cared about. I worked late warehouse shifts, unloading trucks for a grocery company, usually getting home around 1 or 2 in the morning. Most nights I'd come back exhausted, microwave something unhealthy, then pass out with the TV still on. The first time I saw the man outside my apartment, I assumed he was maintenance. I'd gotten home around 1:30 a.m. after a brutal 10-hour shift. My entire body hurt, and I remember barely making it through a shower before collapsing onto the couch. I must have fallen asleep for maybe 30 minutes before 3 slow knocks woke me up. Knock, knock, knock. At first I ignored it. Then came another 3 knocks. I checked my phone. 2:41 a.m. Annoyed more than nervous, I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. A man stood outside. Tall, thin, bald. He wore dark blue clothes that almost looked like a janitor uniform. At first glance, nothing about him seemed immediately threatening. Weird, maybe, but not dangerous. I cracked the door slightly and asked, "Yeah." The man slowly turned toward me. The second I saw his face clearly, I regretted opening the door. Not because he looked violent, because something about him felt off. His eyes looked unfocused, almost glassy, and his smile didn't match the rest of his expression. It was like he'd learned how to imitate a normal smile, without understanding when people were supposed to use one. For several seconds, he just stared at me. Then he asked, "Do you live here alone?" Every alarm bell in my head went off instantly. I tightened my grip on the door and said, "What do you need?" The man tilted his head slightly. "I think someone followed me into the building." That immediately changed the situation. Part of me thought, maybe the guy genuinely needed help. Phoenix had a huge homeless population around that area, and people wandered into apartment buildings all the time. But something still felt wrong. I glanced down the hallway. Empty. No footsteps. No voices. Nothing. When I looked back at him, the smile was gone completely. He looked almost irritated now. "You should let me inside," he said quietly. That sentence hit me harder than it should have, not because it sounded threatening, because it sounded rehearsed, like he'd said it before. I shut the door immediately and locked it. The man didn't react. No yelling, no banging, just silence. I waited near the door for nearly 5 minutes before checking the peephole again. He was still standing there. Perfectly still. Facing the door. I called the apartment's security number, but nobody answered. Eventually, after almost 10 minutes, the man slowly turned around and walked down the hallway toward the elevator. I watched until he disappeared. The next morning, I almost convinced myself I'd overreacted, until I mentioned it casually to an older woman who lived downstairs. The second I described him, her expression changed. "The bald guy?" she asked immediately. That made my stomach tighten. Apparently, multiple people in the building had seen him wandering the hallways late at night over the past few months. Nobody knew where he lived. Nobody even knew if he actually lived there at all. According to her, he'd knock on random apartment doors after midnight and ask strange questions. Sometimes he claimed he was lost. Sometimes he said someone was chasing him. Once he apparently told a tenant he was looking for the right apartment. Management had already called police on him twice, but he always disappeared before they arrived. That night, I checked my locks 3 different times before going to bed. Nothing happened. Or the next night. By the 4th night, I'd mostly stopped thinking about him. Then I came home from work around 1 a.m. and immediately noticed something sitting beside my apartment door. A bottle of water. Half empty. Still cold. I stared at it for several seconds before looking down the hallway. Empty. The bottle genuinely unsettled me more than the knocking had, because it meant someone had been standing outside my apartment recently, enough for the bottle to still feel cold. I kicked it aside, unlocked my door quickly, and went inside. At exactly 3:07 a.m., the knocking started again. 3 slow knocks. I froze immediately. When I looked through the peephole, the bald man stood there again. Except this time, he was much closer. His face nearly filled the entire peephole, and he was whispering something. At first, I couldn't make it out. His lips moved slowly over and over again. I backed away from the door instinctively. Then the whispering stopped. Silence filled the apartment for several seconds. Then suddenly, bang! One hard hit slammed against the door, not enough to break it, just enough to make me jump backward. I called 911 immediately. While waiting for dispatch to answer, I looked through the peephole again. The hallway was empty. Police arrived about 10 minutes later and searched the building. Nothing. No sign of the man. One officer told me they'd received several complaints about someone matching the same description in nearby apartment complexes, too. But nobody had ever identified him. That should have been the end of it. Instead, things got worse. A week later, I bought a cheap security camera that attached inside my peephole so I could record the hallway outside my apartment. For about 2 weeks, nothing unusual happened. Then one Sunday morning around 4 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. Half asleep, I opened the app. The hallway outside my apartment looked empty. Then movement appeared slowly at the edge of the frame. The bald man leaned sideways into view, like he already knew exactly where the camera was positioned. He stared directly into it, not blinking. My heart immediately started pounding. The man slowly raised one finger to his lips. Shh. Then he whispered something loud enough for the camera microphone to catch. I know you're awake. I actually felt cold hearing it, not scared in the normal horror movie way. Real fear, the kind where your body suddenly feels weak. I called 911 again immediately. This time officers arrived much faster because I told dispatch someone was stalking my apartment specifically. But once again, nobody was there. One of the officers checked the stairwell while another reviewed my camera footage. After replaying the clip, he frowned slightly. "Does this hallway camera work all the time?" he asked. "Yeah." He pointed at the screen. The bald man appeared suddenly in frame. No footage showed him walking down the hallway beforehand. No elevator opening. No stairwell door opening. He was just suddenly there. The officer assumed the cheap camera probably skipped frames because of bad Wi-Fi. But I knew that wasn't true. The next day, Apartment management finally reviewed the building's security footage, and that's where things became genuinely disturbing. According to management, the man never entered through the front entrance, never used the elevator, never appeared on any cameras at all. The only footage showing him anywhere inside the building was mine. I moved out less than a week later. A few months afterward, one of my old co-workers asked why I'd left so suddenly. When I explained everything, he got unusually quiet. Then he asked, "Did the guy ever ask what apartment you were in?" I said no. My co-worker stared at me for a second before responding. "That's weird." "Why?" "Because a guy matching that exact description knocked on my apartment door last year." I felt my stomach drop immediately. He continued. He kept asking if I lived alone. To this day, I still check peepholes longer than most people probably do. And sometimes, when I come home late at night and the hallway is completely silent, I still expect to see that bald man standing outside my door again. My grandmother had a rule she repeated so often when I was growing up that eventually everyone in the family started joking about it. "If you hear crying outside at night, don't open the door." She said it during storms, during power outages, even on completely normal nights. And every single time someone asked why, she'd answer the same way. Because some things only want to be invited inside. Nobody took her seriously, especially me. When I was younger, I thought it was just one of those strange southern superstitions old people passed down for no reason. Years later, after she died, I inherited her house in rural Tennessee. That's when I stopped laughing about it. The property sat deep off an old gravel road surrounded by woods on 3 sides. The nearest neighbor lived almost half a mile away, and cell service out there barely worked on good days. It wasn't a huge house, just old. The kind of place where floors creaked even when nobody walked on them and pipes groaned during cold weather. I moved there temporarily after losing my apartment during a rough financial stretch. My plan was to stay 6 months, save money, then move back closer to Nashville. At first, living there actually felt peaceful. No traffic, no noisy neighbors, no sirens at night, just silence. But after a few weeks, I started noticing things that made the place feel wrong. The woods never sounded normal after dark. Even when there wasn't wind, branches snapped occasionally. Sometimes I'd hear footsteps moving through leaves outside late at night. Not animal sounds. Too heavy. Too deliberate. Whenever I checked the windows, though, I never saw anything. One evening, I asked my neighbor Earl if people hunted around the property. Earl was probably in his 70s and had lived there his entire life. He looked toward the woods for a moment before answering. Not anymore. That was it. No explanation. Just not anymore. The first real incident happened during a storm in October. Around midnight, heavy rain knocked out the power across the entire area. The house went completely black except for occasional lightning flashes through the windows. I lit a few candles and sat in the living room reading while the storm raged outside. Then I heard crying. At first it sounded distant, a woman sobbing somewhere beyond the trees. Soft, broken, almost swallowed by the rain. I froze immediately, because the sound was getting closer. A few moments later, it came from directly outside the house. Then a woman's voice whispered through the storm, "Please help me." Every hair on my arm stood up. I remembered my grandmother's warning instantly. Still, part of me felt guilty ignoring it. What if someone genuinely needed help? A car accident, maybe. Someone injured in the storm. I grabbed a flashlight and walked carefully toward the front window. Rain slammed against the glass hard enough to blur everything outside. Another flash of lightning illuminated the porch. A woman stood near the bottom steps. Long, dark hair covered most of her face, barefoot, wearing what looked like a thin white nightgown soaked completely by rain. She wasn't moving, just crying softly. Then lightning flashed again, and I noticed her feet. They were covered in thick mud, like she'd walked miles through the woods. I almost opened the door right then, until the crying suddenly stopped. Completely. The silence hit harder than the sound itself. Slowly, the woman lifted her head toward the house, even through rain and darkness. I realized she was smiling, not relieved, not desperate. Smiling. Then came 3 slow knocks on the front door. Knock, knock, knock. Calm. Controlled. Like she already knew I was standing there. I stayed completely silent. Several seconds passed before she spoke again. "Your grandmother used to help me." My stomach dropped immediately. Nobody should have known who owned that house before me. Especially not some random woman in the middle of a storm. I stepped backward away from the window. Another lightning flash lit up the porch. The woman was gone. I rushed to the side window and looked toward the yard. She was walking slowly toward the woods, but something about her movement looked wrong, too stiff, almost unnatural. Then I noticed shapes moving between the trees behind her, tall silhouettes, watching the house. I locked every door and spent the rest of the night awake with my grandfather's shotgun beside the couch. At sunrise, I finally worked up the nerve to go outside. The muddy ground around the porch was covered in footprints, bare human footprints. But mixed among them were strange drag marks leading back toward the woods, like something heavy had been pulled through the mud. That afternoon, I drove to Earl's house and asked if he knew anything about a woman wandering the property at night. The second I described her, he went quiet. "Did she cry before you saw her?" he asked finally. I nodded. Earl stared toward his kitchen window for several seconds. Then he sighed heavily. "Your grandma ever tell you about Clara?" I said. According to Earl, decades earlier, a young woman named Clara disappeared during a storm after crashing her car somewhere near the woods. Search teams spent days looking for her. They never found a body. But afterward, strange stories spread around the area. People claimed they heard crying outside their homes at night, sometimes knocking. A few residents supposedly opened their doors trying to help. Most refused to talk afterward about what they saw. And over the years, several families moved away from nearby properties unexpectedly. Earl eventually shrugged and said, "Probably just old stories." But he didn't sound convinced himself. That night, I locked every curtain before sunset. Around 1:30 a.m., I woke suddenly to knocking. 3 slow knocks. Front door again. I sat up immediately. Another 3 knocks followed. Then silence. I grabbed my phone. No signal. The storm from the previous night had returned, and rain hammered against the roof again. I walked quietly toward the front window and pulled the curtain aside slightly. Nobody stood on the porch. Then crying started behind the house. Soft sobbing drifted through the backyard, moving slowly around the walls outside. I backed away immediately. The crying stopped near the kitchen window. Then came another voice, a man this time, whispering softly from outside. "Open the door." I didn't move. The whisper came again. Closer now. "She's cold." My chest tightened so hard it hurt. The voice sounded human, normal. That somehow made it worse. Then something tapped lightly against the kitchen glass. 3 taps. I forced myself to look. At first I saw only darkness. Then lightning flashed. A man stood outside the kitchen window smiling at me. Tall, thin, pale face. And behind him, deeper in the rain near the woods, stood the woman, watching silently. I stumbled backwards so fast I knocked over one of the dining chairs. When I looked again, both figures were gone. The next morning I drove into town and bought motion lights and outdoor cameras. For about a week, nothing happened. No crying, no knocking. I started feeling stupid again. Maybe stress and isolation were getting to me. Then one night, my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the backyard camera. I opened the app immediately. The woods behind the house looked empty at first. Then the infrared camera adjusted slightly. Shapes stood between the trees, multiple figures, too far away for details, just pale outlines staring toward the house. I counted at least 4. I called Earl immediately, no answer. Then another notification appeared. Front porch camera. I switched feeds. The woman stood directly outside the front door, closer than before. This time I could see her face clearly. Her skin looked pale gray beneath the porch light. Eyes wide, unblinking. Mud covered the bottom of her nightgown. Then she slowly leaned toward the camera microphone and whispered, "Let us in." Not me. Us. Every outdoor light suddenly shut off at once. The camera feed glitched black. Then came the knocking. Not just from the front door, from every side of the house. 3 knocks at a time. Different walls, different windows. Like multiple people surrounded the property. My breathing became uncontrollable. I grabbed the shotgun and locked myself inside the upstairs bedroom. The knocking continued below me. Slow, patient. Then footsteps creaked across the front porch. Another voice called softly through the front door. "Please help us." Then another voice joined in. Then another. Different men, women, children, all whispering variations of the same thing. "Open the door." The voices moved around the house for nearly an hour, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing quietly. At one point, I heard footsteps directly outside the bedroom window upstairs, which should have been impossible. There was no roof access, no balcony, nothing. Then came 3 soft taps against the glass beside me. I couldn't force myself to look. I just sat frozen against the wall, gripping the shotgun, while the tapping continued. Tap, tap, tap. Eventually, sometime near dawn, everything stopped. No voices, no footsteps, nothing. I stayed awake until sunrise before finally checking outside. Mud covered the entire porch, footprints everywhere, dozens of them, some adult-sized, some disturbingly small. And in the mud beneath the upstairs bedroom window were more footprints. As if people had somehow stood directly against the wall overnight. I packed my things that same morning. Before leaving, I stopped by Earl's house one last time. His truck was there, but nobody answered the door. That's when I noticed deep, muddy footprints leading around the side of his house toward the woods. I called his name several times. Nothing. I almost followed the tracks. Then I heard something far back between the trees. Crying. Soft. Distant. A woman sobbing quietly. And somewhere beneath it, multiple voices whispering together. I left immediately. Police later told me Earl had apparently gone to stay with family out of state, but something about the way they said it felt uncertain, like even they didn't fully believe it. That was almost 3 years ago. I live in Nashville now in a crowded apartment downtown. Street noise, traffic, sirens, anything except silence. Sometimes I still wake up randomly around 2 or 3 a.m. expecting to hear knocking. Most nights I don't. But about 2 months ago, during a thunderstorm, someone knocked 3 times on my apartment door. Slow, measured. I looked through the peephole immediately. Nobody there. Then my phone buzzed. A notification from an unknown number containing only a single photo. My old house, taken at night from the woods behind it. And standing in the upstairs bedroom window was someone watching outside. And honestly, after hearing stories like these, I think most of us would rather hear nothing at all than 3 slow knocks at the door in the middle of the night. If you enjoyed tonight's video, leave a like, subscribe, and maybe check your locks before going to sleep. I'll see you in the next story.